What's up, guys? Welcome to the Babbling Pastor Podcast with your host, Michael.
And Rob, who is epically surprised by the cool intro music right now that he wasn't expecting.
No, I feel like I need to be like, welcome to Hard Rock K25, your local host. Brought to you by Jim's Car Lot.
Jim's Carr.
If it doesn't smoke, it's not working. All right, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Babbling Pastor Podcast. Guess what, guys? We have made it to I almost said Luke. I don't know. Actually, I know why I said Luke, but it's not Luke. James chapter 4, guys, out of 5 chapters. But don't expect this. We're covering 4 verses, so it's not like we're speeding through this thing, if you know what I'm saying. Also, interesting thing brought up after we stopped recording last time. If you guys are enjoying this type of thing, let us know with a like or with a comment. And if you hate us, if you can make that more private, that'd be appreciative. I don't like really. I don't want to be sad. So that'd be helpful. I appreciate that. All right. So today we are covering James chapter 4, verses 1 through 4. So a slightly shorter passage here, but he is going into, I think, something that we can kind of see connected to last week's verses, but we'll read them and then we'll see what connections we find there, as well as the words of wisdom of practicality that James has been bringing us this entire time. So James chapter 4, verses 1 through 4 says this: what causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you're asking wrongly to spend it on your own passions. You adulterous people, with an exclamation point. Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be friends with the world makes himself an enemy with God. Rob, I think it would be safe to say that this is some of probably top 10, top 15 most misused verses ever.
Yeah, there are so many to choose from.
So real quick, I do think that this sort of connects a bit with what James was talking about last time, right? So he's talking about wisdom. He's talking about 2 types of wisdom. Now he goes into worldliness. And he's talking about quarrels that are happening among them. So that does seem like these connect a bit. They're not using wisdom well. They're fighting. God help the pastor in verse 2 that has to do with people that are murdering their own congregation. I mean, that's an issue not many of us have to deal with, thankfully. But he does make, again, this, like I think you said in the last episode, he seems to be saying the different things the same way over and over again. And that we kind of see this here as well.
Yeah, I think that if we would just ask, I think in the church today, this first question regularly, and like with an open, like with the mirror handy, ask this question, and with open arms invite truth, even hard truth. Man, what a different church we would be.
Yeah. Well, here, let me put this back up. I think James basically does have that mirror, right? So he says, what causes quarrels and fights among you? Which is, again, that great question that you ask. Like, what is this that's doing this? And James goes, is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? That
yeah,
you can't even blame the other person,
right? I love that, because I tell I actually use this when I was talking to someone just last week. I said most of the time when a couple comes to counseling, for instance, most of the time that you have to, not even a couple, but just people. Most of the time, it's at some point you have to say, no, shut up. what did you do wrong, right? Because all we ever do naturally, which is again demonic, remember last week, all we ever do naturally is say, the woman ate the fruit and she tempted me, right? All we ever do is blame the other person and think about what they're doing wrong. I mean, if you've ever raised more than one child or been around more than one child, you've seen this play out, right? But he first, blah 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 blah, right? And we have to be willing to say, okay, log in my eye, right? Like let's look at this with a complete picture and understand that no, there you make peace because both of you are at war with one another, right? So yeah, this question, man, I honestly I think if people and churches and um uh, uh leadership teams in churches, if we all were to ask this question honestly and answer it honestly, I really do think that alone would change a lot.
That could be a whole podcast in and of itself. Just hand this verse to denominations. They're like, hey guys, why are you fighting? Well, you're at war with yourself. You don't know who you
Right.
are.
Yeah.
Wow. That's I'm telling you, we can end the podcast now. That's some great wisdom right there, right? So then he goes in though and really digs into that. I mean, this James is so good in regards to practicality and getting to the heart of what the issue is. So yeah, you have fights. Why you have fights? Because you're at war within yourself. Well, what does that look like, James? Verse 2, you desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. I mean, it's this, you are, right? You are Abraham, the one that thinks that you can outthink God. Like you don't have it, so you go out, you do it. So you don't have it, so you go murder somebody, or you want it, so you just fight for it till you get it. Like you are the one that thinks that you can outthink. You're the smartest person in the room, which goes back to what happened before, this whole wisdom thing. Like if you are wise, operate out of the wisdom from above. Yeah. So practicality through the roof here.
Yeah, you and to be fair, when he says you lust and do not have, so you commit murder, Jesus equated that with hating people, right?
Yeah.
And so I mean that still applies here, in that because you obviously see that more often than you see someone in your church lust after someone and then commit murder because of it. But it's the same thing, right? I mean, spiritually, the damage that gets done is the same thing, and so you lust and do not have, and so you're at odds because of that, or you hate this person because of that, or you can't stand them because of that, right? You fight and quarrel because of it. You do not have because you do not ask. You're envious and can't obtain, so you fight and quarrel. So, but I do think that these two particular sins that he mentions really take out a whole lot of
got your drunk drawer issues, that cover a bunch of stuff.
To you lust and do not have. I mean, that's not just talking about sexual things, even though that's what we tend to think of.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It's totally different. Yeah,
right. I mean, that's covetousness, and these two things are talking about overall. I don't have that. I want it.
Well, yeah, I think lust, the definition technically is just the burning desire to get something.
Right.
That's all it is.
Yeah. And we always equate that with sexual things or whatever. But it has to do with everything. You know, don't covet your neighbor's wife or his house or his nice fence, you know, or whatever it is, right? Today's society, you see, we're blessed to have people in our church who come from a huge range of economic status, you know, of financial status, and a lot of other things that go beyond financial. We're pretty diverse in a lot of different ways, and but what that can do, now I'm, not that I'm saying this is a big problem I'm dealing with right now or anything, but what that can do is it can create a situation that that I'm constantly looking at this person and feeling like, man, I can't even identify or approach or whatever, and it can cause this covetous kind of thing, and then before you know it, you're feeling like, man, I deserve better. It just leads to so many things, and so these two words that he uses, lust and being envious, um, it really is. You lust, and so you don't have it, and you don't have so something you don't already have, and then he goes a step further, and something you can't even obtain,
Yeah.
right? And so this really, he's giving an overall picture of like your evil desire within you is causing this ugliness, um, and then there's sin on the back half of that that says, why do I lust for that? Well, because I'm not lusting for more of Christ, right? I'm not burning for more of God, and so something's going to fill that, right? So I only have so many hours in a day to burn with desire for something, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something's going to fill that void, and so you look for all sorts of different things that you believe wholeheartedly will satisfy you or make your life better or good or whatever, and it won't.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole misguided thing going on back there, but this little bit makes me think of Romans 7, when Paul is talking about this very thing in himself,
Mm-hmm.
right? That I find then the principle that evil is present in me, the one who wants to do good, for I joyfully concur with the law of God in the inner man, but I see a different law in the members of my body, waging war, same language even, waging
Yeah.
war against the law of my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin, which is in my members. And he's so distraught. I love this because I feel like if Paul can feel this way, right, like the rest of us are a little bit okay sometimes, but he's like, wretched man that I am, exclamation point, right? Who will set me free from this body of death? So this is this is a human problem
Yeah.
that he deals with, and I think that's part of James's point.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then so he goes on. So I love that. I'm just gonna throw verses out and let you just do a whole monologue, and then I'll bring it back and we can do that again because I like it. I love it. There's a lot of wisdom there. So he goes on this whole thing about you covet and you cannot obtain. So you fight and you quarrel because you want these things, you can't get them. And he says, but you don't have them because you don't ask. But he knows somebody's like, no, actually, I have. I've asked for those, James. I've done that. And he says, well, you ask and don't receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your own passions. You adulterous people. So the whole thing is like, no, I've asked for these good things. I've asked for these things that I'm now fighting over, but I didn't get them. And because I didn't get them, I'm going to try to get them myself. And James goes, the reason you didn't get them is because, like you said before, your heart is in the wrong place doing this. Like you're wanting them not for the good of the kingdom, not for the good of the body, not really even for your own true goodness, but you're wanting them to fulfill some sort of passion in you that isn't good for any of those above named categories.
Yeah.
And because of it, you are adulterous, which is again not a kid glove word. You are splitting off for the covenant you have with God because of these passions and the things you're asking for. And you're so desiring of them, you don't even see it. You don't even realize it's happening, which is like, gosh, if James, let's just mail the book of James out to like every denomination, church, and Christian, and just sit on it for a second.
Yeah, that's right. And we, every kid, prays for what we adults can see, there always are going to be things that are prayed for sometimes that are kind of like dumb, right? Like that Lambo that I want or whatever. And but we as adults, really, it's not different.
Yeah.
It's maybe not as obvious sometimes. And with wrong motives, you ask and do not receive because you ask with wrong motives. You're right. He's anticipating that, but wait a minute. I do pray and ask, right? But the whole idea of their asking is that what's behind that is, at least here, lust and envy.
Yeah.
Right. So when they're asking for something from God, they're asking him so that stuff from God can fill them and make them happy, rather than God filling them and making them joyous, right? That and so you're asking with not even only a wrong motive, but completely wrong-headed. There's some false presupposition behind this that says God's stuff will satisfy me, not God.
Yeah.
And so certainly when you ask God for things with that in mind, he's not going to help you worship other things. Right? And that's really what it boils down to. He's not going to aid and embed your sin.
Yeah.
And so and you might say, well, then how do you ask with correct motives, right? And that really comes down to asking. Elsewhere in Scripture, it talks about asking according to the will of God, right? Well, how do I know that, right? Or what does that even mean? Well, I think you and I would agree with one another in that the longer that you spend maturing as a Christian, not just being a Christian, because there are a lot of old baby Christians still, but the longer you spend in that sanctification process, learning the Word, all of those things, that the more that your will is naturally going to bend toward God's will.
Yeah.
You're naturally going to get closer to that in your own desires. Your own desires are not going to be so envious as much as they maybe used to be.
Yeah.
And so when I ask God, Father, I really want a new house because we could use more space. That might not be because of envy, but a lot of times it is, because you see the Facebook of everyone else, and you see, you went to dinner with this person, and man, that was nice. But when I ask God, Father, help me love you more, right? Help me be a better husband. Like, those are things that God can get behind, right? Like, your ask is gonna be different.
Yeah. No, and I think so. Two things to that, and I think one, I think within context, we need to remember, like we talked about before, that James is talking to people that he loves. They are being persecuted. They are in situations. I mean, this is why the book is practical, because he's saying, look, these are odd situations for you, and you're going to need some practical advice to get through them. And in those situations, it is easy to quarrel. It is easy to be on edge. It is easy. I mean, again, we don't know the exact situations financially these people are in, but they are dealing apparently with some economic disparities. They are dealing with being kind of put out amongst where they were. They are dealing with some persecution. And when you have all of those stresses and you are edgy and you are not inclined to be kind, like, these words are wise from him to love on them, to be like, look, like, don't ask for things that, yes, they seem like they would help you now, but are they? Like, why are you asking for them then? I mean, this is pastoral advice to people. Second, I think that that's sort of where James's aggravation comes in. You were talking about sanctification. I think sometimes, like, we really want, I've had these discussions with people before, and I remember people having these discussions with me where they're like, why don't you get it yet? Like, why don't you understand? And I wasn't that far along. I mean, I wasn't even interested in sanctification process that the Lord had going in my life. And it's one of those things where James is like, you guys, like, come on, like, do you not see that the things you're asking for are not the things that you need right now?
Yeah.
And there is this tension here where he is using strong language, but I think we have to understand it again within the context that this is strong language for their good. He loves them. He wants them to know Jesus more. He wants them to have a productive life for the kingdom. And to understand that sometimes they need to be put time out. Sometimes they need to be whipped a bit. Like they need to, they need to be in a very gentle, loving way. So that, hey, the things you're doing are demonic. The things that you're doing are not of God, and you need to know that you're being very adulterous right now, and not in kitty glove way, in a very straightforward, you don't do dumb stuff, guys, kind of way,
Right.
in order to help them to understand that a little bit. So
Yeah, he could have just said, go read Hosea, guys.
yeah, could have told them that.
Yeah, you talk about the context of that whole thing, and when I think immediately about any Christians or missionaries that are in Ukraine right now, right, or Russia right now, and all of the difficulty that's going on there, particularly in Ukraine, where the fighting and death and stuff is. And it's easy in those situations as a Christian or whatever, and especially if it's a situation in which you're being persecuted for righteousness' sake, right? But you can lean more on Father, keep us safe, than Father, make us bold no matter what, right? And that's what you see in Acts, right? And among the apostles and Christians there is when they would get arrested or whatever, like part of their heart was they would then pray for more boldness. and
that was hard. It's going to be harder next time. I need some boldness to be able to do this next time.
Right. Not and that's not to say that you shouldn't pray for health in those situations, right? But it is to say that your chief concern should not be that. Your chief concern should be, Father, help me blurt it out as loudly as I can, and change people because of it, and whatever else, right? And so our their motives for some of what they deal with in a persecution, from a persecution perspective, could be impure still, if their chief concern is not boldness in proclaiming the gospel that we've all been charged to proclaim, to glorify God, right? So, but yeah, that adulterous language is pretty rough.
Well, and he sort of clears it up or clarifies, I guess, in that next verse when he said, or I guess continuing verse, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend with the world makes himself an enemy to God. So this idea, and again, I think within the context, it helps us even a little bit more, that it would be easy for them to capitulate to the thing around them, to whatever's bringing on the persecution, whatever's bringing on the fighting, whatever's bringing on the thing where they have to exercise wisdom in a godly way. It would be easy for them to say, this isn't worth it. This is just not fine. I'll do your thing. And he James again is saying the same thing in a different way, saying like, yeah, you can be friends with the world. That's you can do that if you want, but know that if you do that, just like if you choose ungodly wisdom, there's like a consequence to that action. So if you want to be friends with the world, fine, but that puts enmity, that puts space between, that makes you an enemy of the God that created you, that you declare. So therefore, whoever wishes to be friends with the world, you make yourself an enemy with God. You've picked a team. You've decided to do this. And he wants them to know the consequences of those actions, just like he wanted them to know the consequences of choosing unwise ways. Yeah, if you do that, like we talked about in last episode, you will have vile practices and disorder. And if you choose to be a friend with the world in doing the things the way the world does them, just know that you're not just kind of off. You got a rough, you're sort of, it's complicated relationship with God. No, you're an enemy. You're an enmity. There is a problem. So
yeah, we were just this past Sunday as we're recording this past Sunday, the text that I was in Matthew had Jesus call Peter Satan, the adversary, right?
Yeah.
Which is, again, strong language, but that's the idea too, right? Like, anytime we are not heaven focused, not focused on the world that the kingdom in which we actually belong, then everything else is a distraction. Everything else is temporary. Everything else is worth less.
Yeah.
And First John, he does some of this kind of language, right? In chapter 2, do not love the world nor the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the boastful pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. The world is passing away, and also its lusts. But the one who does the will of God lives forever, right? I mean, that really nails this coffee shut, I think. And then you have Jesus talking to the religious leaders and John, and he says, "You are of your father, the devil, and you do the desires of your father," right? So that this isn't just James either, right? Like, this is just New Testament. This is just not New Testament, but Bible.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what you see throughout all of Scripture. In fact, you could argue that Adam and Eve, in the very beginning, what they wanted was the world, what the flesh desired, to be God.
Yep.
And so this has been the problem from the very beginning, the world versus the God who made it.
Yeah. Well, and I think this episode, as well as last episode, and I mean next episode, he obviously goes further into this point, but especially these are very practical means, I think, as well as the whole book, but very practical means for Christians in every time, in every place, every situation. That, like, regardless, as if, like you mentioned before, like if you're in Ukraine and you're having to ask for more boldness, or if you're in the United States and you have everything you need, well, what are you praying for then, right? I mean, so regardless of your situation or where you're at, James's word for the believer is incredibly practical. You will always have a choice to make in regards to exercising the wisdom of God. You will always have a choice to make who you're going to be friends with. Is it going to be God, or is it going to be the world? And I think sometimes the church hasn't made the greatest decision in that in some points. I mean, there's been times before where the church as an entity we're like, well, we can kind of befriend the world a little bit and get a little bit of prestige here. I mean, they like us enough. And it's one of those things where I think throughout time, every time you look at history, when the church does that, even now, you have consequences and fallout from that, where eventually the lines are drawn that are not blurry anymore. There was something, I'll bring this up just sort of in the podcast from this verse, but the other day there was something that happened. I never heard of this person in my life, but apparently his name's Dave Rubin. Apparently he's some sort of conservative commentarist, talking head sort of individual with Rubin, Blaze.
I know who it is.
Yeah. I don't have a clue who this person is, but apparently he's homosexual and he's got a partner or a husband or whatever the relationship is there. But they hired a surrogate and they're having, I think, twins or 2 children. I don't remember exactly how the story goes. But on Twitter the other day, at the time of this recording, of course, like, it exploded because conservatism as a term was like split down the middle. You had conservatives that were like, yeah, good job, Dave. Good. Yeah. Congratulations. Da, 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 da. And then you had Christian, if you want to type conservative onto that were like, oh, I can't condone this. And I think in that moment, it was really, for me, just watching it, because being totally outside the situation, not having a clue who this person was, it was very interesting to be like, oh, well, there's the fault line, guys. Like, you want to say this is conservatism. Well, this is conservatism up to a point as far as Christianity is concerned, right? So when you lump in with a group of people and say, I'm with this group, maybe you are. Where's the line, though? Like, is there a fault line there? And that was the very interesting thing that I saw. Like, if you're talking about friendship with the world, I think oftentimes we forget in our comfort, that we maybe befriended the world a little bit more than we would like to say we have.
Yeah.
And James here is like, hey, just so you know, just so you know. So
yeah, our as Christians in America in particular, our conservatism and or liberalism must be governed by the word of God.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line issue of all of it. And any stand, but we tend to think about that backwards. Unfortunately, we bring our worldview that is created by the world into Scripture, and so it's backwards.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that's good on this. Well, next one, we'll be continuing in chapter 4. Guys, thank you. If you do like it, if you do appreciate this type of thing, make sure you like it, comment, do all the cool things. Make up a radio name for Rob in the comment section if you're interested.
Oh my goodness.
We'll talk about that next time. Bye.
You're fired.